Welcome back, everybody. Well, it's time to get away from the controversy of my current video series responding to the stuff about gods and generals and get back to something we all know and love, which is Sabaton history. So recently I did a reaction to the song Devil Dogs, which is a great song about the U.S. Marine Corps and their involvement at the Battle of Belleau Wood. And the early parts, at least for the Americans, the early parts of combat in World War I. So today we're going to dive into the Sabaton history of Devil Dogs. And so as always, I welcome your input, your comments, your questions, your observations. Let's talk about this topic. Use the comment section below. Make sure you check out the original content in the link. And please don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Let's dive in.
I'm Indy Nidell.
And I'm Pat from Sabaton.
And this is Sabaton History. The U.S. Marines, who got the nickname Devil Dogs, made a serious impact towards the end of the First World War.
And we thought that Devil Dogs would be a perfect title for a Sabaton song, and the story was really good.
The U.S. Marines have been training for fighting the Great War in France since the U.S. declaration of war on Germany, April 6, 1917. They were a rather small force, not even 14,000 men strong. But the U.S. Marine Corps could look back on a long and proud history of service. The soldiers of land and sea had served U.S. interests overseas in places like the Philippines, Haiti, and even the coasts of China. But now, they were sent out to fight in a global war of which the U.S. had only been a passive spectator, and their enemies were not poorly trained insurgents, but battle-hardened soldiers who'd seen years of active combat.
So let's talk about the Marines, for example, for a minute. The very nature of their name, Marine Corps, implies that these were historically meant to be units that fought on land and sea and were kind of the infantry component of the Navy. And actually, to this day, the Marine Corps is not its own department. It is actually a part of the Navy Department in the United States. They're under the Secretary of the Navy. There is a Commandant of the Marine Corps, but it is technically a department of the Navy, and people who become officers in the Marines typically go to Annapolis, the Naval Academy.
To prepare themselves for modern war, the Marine Corps had included mostly French battle doctrines in their training, especially the new French emphasis on move and fire tactics, but with the Marine Corps preference of the smaller platoon formation. Equipped with rifles, light support artillery and machine guns, and rifle grenades, the Marines soon at least looked like a modern fighting force. And yes, before you comment, the American version of the show-shot light machine gun was terrible, but packing serious firepower while being as mobile as possible was of prime importance to the Marine Corps style of fighting. Anyhow, they did not simply just copy French doctrines, though, but put heavy emphasis on traditional soldiery as well. True to their credo, every Marine a rifleman, the Corps constantly honed its skills on the shooting range with the standard Springfield rifle and trained for close combat with the bayonet.
So one of the difficult parts of the U.S. entering the war as late as we did is that you've got the British and the French and others, but primarily the British and the French on the Western Front, who have been fighting the Germans for the better part of 3 years. And so they have a very good idea of what the nature of this war is. And the Americans come in under General Pershing, wanting to be this independent force, having their own ideas about how to fight, and basically, for the most part, even though we were observing and watching what was happening, wanting to be independent of that. Whereas the French and the Germans the French and the British wanted us to be under them. And they said, hey, we've been fighting this war for a while. We know what we're doing. We know what this is about. You should serve under us. Pershing didn't want to hear that. And so unfortunately, at least to an extent, the Americans had to learn some of the same mistakes that the British and the French had already learned from earlier in the war.
Two skills that, while not left behind in the Great War, took a backseat to others in terms of general 1918 combat, where the machine gun and the hand grenade were thought of as the tools of the infantryman. In early 1918, the huge German spring offensives, the Kaiserschlacht, had smashed into and through the Allied lines in Belgium and France. And as their Operation Blücher kicked off in late May, the Germans were soon less than 50 miles from Paris.
And there were a couple of reasons why the Germans chose to do this spring offensive, and part of it had to do with the American entrance into the war. They understood that long term the war was not going to be winnable as more and more American troops poured into the Western Front. So there was a window there, a window in between when Russia exited the war and when the U.S. got fully arrived and in large numbers in the West, for them to exploit this. So you have to wonder if Russia hadn't exited the war and America hadn't come in, whether or not they would have even done this spring offensive. You know, if the United States doesn't enter the war, I don't know if maybe that changes what the Germans choose to do. But this was their last desperate attempt to try and change the outcome before it got out of their control when the Americans started to arrive in large numbers.
Panic spread, even though the offensive was pretty clearly running out of steam, and the Allies urged the Americans to send in reinforcements. The Marines, as part of the 2nd American Division, were among those first reinforcements that were judged ready to be sent into action. Operation Blucher had created a large salient across the Aisne River and into the French front lines from Rheims to Soissons, and the German army was trying to get a hold on strategically valuable positions from which to launch further attacks. Such a position was Belleau Wood. The first elements of the 5th Marine Regiment were rushed into the lines on June 2nd. They were greeted by exhausted French soldiers who suggested the Marines follow their retreat, to which Captain Lloyd Williams only retorted, "Retreat?
We just got here."
Hell, we just got here." The French were by no means broken.
That's such an American thing to say, right? I mean, these French have been on the front for 3 years. They've seen the horrors of this war. The Americans come in all gung-ho and like, yeah, we just got here. Come on, you know? I love the attitude, but that is kind of a very American thing to do, I think.
But they had taken a hard hit, and the Americans had to take the defensive lead and dug in. The next day, as the Germans advanced from Belleau Wood over an open wheat field, they were unexpectedly met by highly accurate rifle fire and cut down in large numbers before hastily retreating back to the wood, probably wondering what the heck had just hit them. The German positions within Belleau Wood overlooked a wide area and the small town of Belleau itself and its surroundings. And if an Allied counterattack was going to successfully eliminate the German salient and drive them back over the Aisne, their positions in Belleau Wood had to be taken. The next day, June 3rd, the Marines formed up in light order and marched over the same wheat field towards the woods to take it by storm. But as they marched into the open, they were suddenly hit by rifle and machine gun fire. Taking heavy casualties, the advance was quickly halted and the survivors pulled back. Clearly, the Americans were still green. They had to learn, and learn fast.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and they had just watched the Germans do the same thing over that same field. This is absolutely where the Americans have to learn the nature of this war. You got to remember, it's been, 20 years since the U.S. was involved in a major conflict, and even that wasn't anywhere near the size of this war. And the weapons, even in that 20 years, had changed so much, and the nature of the conflict was so very different than the Spanish-American War was.
The Germans opposing them were veterans of the 4th Reserve Corps. Their commander was Major Josef Bischoff, a career soldier who had fought in the German Africa mission and was himself an experienced bushfighter. Although his men were suffering from exhaustion and chronic shortages of ammunition, shells, and food, he was determined to put his experience to good use in the thick of the woods.
So another thing he mentions there, and I should have mentioned that earlier, another reason for this spring offensive is Germany's running out of everything. The Allied blockade of German ports, keeping supplies and food, had devastated the German home front, but also the German military. And this really was probably one of the main reasons why Germany lost the war. The naval blockade just crippled them. and they could not go much longer. And you could start to see that not only at home, but also on the front.
Carefully prepared his defenses. Thick undergrowth of bushes and large boulders were ideal hiding spots, and the steep ravines and hills slowed down every advance. So while it was really difficult to maintain an attacking formation, it also was to maintain a static line of defense. Belleau Wood was a place of small unit fighting. To break into Belleau Wood, the Marines had to take the high ground in the villages outside the woods first.
And one other thing I want to point out, too, is if you look at a map of this area today, this is a really small area, and they fought over it for like 3 or 4 weeks. And actually, the American cemetery today, I think, is right here. I'd have to look at the map to see exactly, but I'm pretty sure it's right on the north side of Belleau Wood. But it's not a large, it's not like the Ardennes, which is just this massive forest, or the Argonne, which was a massive forest. This is a very small area that all this fighting was taking place.
While French artillery blasted Belleau Wood into an even more unmaneuverable maze, the men of the 5th Marines went into battle once again. On the 6th of June, they advanced towards the German positions on Hill 142, a major strongpoint that overlooked large parts of the woods. Again, they were met by entrenched machine guns and took heavy casualties in brutal fighting, especially after the German counterattack smashed into their advance. But the Marines prevailed. The hill was strewn with mutilated bodies from both sides, but it demonstrated that the Marines were not shaken by the effects of battle. Which was good, because this was only a taste of what was yet to come.
Yep.
On the 11th, another major attack began. While other Marine companies attacked from the north and south, the main force was again ordered to advance over the open wheat field. This time, though, they had the help of a heavy ground fog that shrouded the advancing Marines from the eyes of the German outposts until they were already on top of them. Bayonets first, the Marines stormed into the German trench lines, attacking at close range. In those woods, the men were cut off. The heavy fog made flare guns ineffective, and telephone lines were already cut by the shelling. Only cold steel and personal bravery would prevail. The Americans were victorious in rolling up the forward defenses, but the Germans were not done yet. Vanishing in the bushes, they retreated to new defenses. The initial rush had cost the Marines dearly, and during the night, they were suddenly hit by 7,000 mustard gas shells, saturating their surroundings with deadly toxins.
So here's the Americans' chance to learn again. Now they get to learn the nature of gas attacks on the Western Front.
Still, they were determined to push on, NCOs leading the small platoons. Machine gun nests were stormed by all-or-nothing bayonet charges. Grenades exploded among trees and rocks, sending deadly splinters flying through the chaos of battle, and snipers targeted them from the treetops. But still, the Marines kept up their momentum. In fact, their aggressiveness was their best asset in those thick woods. More than once, they pushed through the German lines, then rolled up their defenses from the rear. In the spirit of Dan Daly, who just days before had spurred on his fellow Marines with the words, "Come on, you sons of bitches, do you want to live forever?"
Now, Dan Daly, who is one of those larger-than-life characters, right? He had received the Medal of Honor two times before the war. Once, I think, in the Spanish-American War, and once in Haiti back a couple of years before the U.S. entered this war. And he was actually nominated for a third Medal of Honor at this battle, but it was downgraded because there were a lot of things involved, but some people actually said that they didn't think any living person should have 3 Medals of Honor. But Dan Daly remembered that quote differently. He remembered it. The "do you want to live forever" part he said, but the first part of it, he recalled it as being something else he said. And you ask the other people, this is how they remember it. Either way, it's one of those things that goes down in lore. It's a really cool story. It also harkens back to centuries before, where somebody else had said something similar along the lines of "do you want to live forever?" So I'm sure that's the kind of thing that got said many times in a war.
The Marines surged forwards. Few prisoners were taken in these days of the war, if any. It was merciless you or me, close-range fighting, with no room for quarter.
And, there's one other thing I wanted to mention before, and I forgot to. Don't underestimate the fact that while the Americans are coming in without the experience of fighting on the front line, the fact that they haven't been on the line for 3 years and they come in as fresh troops does play into their hands when going on the offensive, because guys who have been on the line for 3 years and watched their buddies die probably weren't willing to take risks nearly as much. They're probably looking at this more as, let me just try and survive this and get through it. And they're weary and exhausted and overwhelmed, and I'm sure their psyches had to be just broken by this point from all of what they had experienced. The Americans are coming in without any of that, and so while they also don't have the experience that aids them, they do have that working for them, I think.
After days of combat, the Germans had lost significant chunks of ground and finally broke on the evening of the 24th. They fled to their last fortified positions near the edge of the woods. The Marines, though, had to stop as well. Despite their success, the casualties had been high, and thousands of Marines were either dead or wounded, among them Captain Williams, who had succumbed to gas and shrapnel wounds. It was now up to the heavy artillery to soften up the enemy first before the final attack could drive them from the wood. After a night of heavy shelling, the Marines moved out. Again, they met heavy machine gun and sniper fire. But after a few hours of heavy fighting, the battle was pretty much over. Ever more exhausted and demoralized Germans surrendered without a fight, and whole companies were captured by single men. By midday, June 26, after 25 days of fighting, the last Germans in the wood were killed or captured. The report to American headquarters read, "Wood's now U.S. Marine Corps entirely." The fighting for Belleau Wood became an instant PR hit in the American media. Ecstatic newspaper headlines ran on how the Marines saved Paris and of how the vicious devil dogs, as they were called, were feared by the Germans.
You know, it's kind of funny because Marines saved Paris. This was one small spot on a very large front. But hey, you know how the sensational media can be, especially when this is the Americans' first real ground combat experience in this war, to be able to publicize back home and kind of build morale and support for the war.
Belleau Wood was in many ways the birthplace of the modern U.S. Marine Corps, and the name Devil Dog stuck after the heavy fighting of those June days in 1918. It is not entirely clear if, and in fact is even unlikely, that the name Devil Dogs, in German Teufelshunde, has its roots in the actual engagement in Belleau Wood. The term Teufelhunde had already appeared in the La Crosse Tribune in Wisconsin on April 27th. And other newspapers attributed the Devil Dog name to German pilots who apparently cursed the accuracy of American anti-aircraft batteries with that name. But whatever the case, the Marines had taken the fight to the enemy and were ready and willing to accept heavy casualties to achieve victory. So the fighting at Belleau Wood might as well have earned them the nickname Devil Dogs. The ferociousness of the attack was a real contributor that summer to the breakdown of the morale of the Germans, who had erroneously thought of the Americans as incompetent farmers and cowboys that did not know how to fight. They were very much mistaken. Okay, now Devil Dogs is from the new album, The Great War. Yeah.
Yes. And one of the things that catched my attention while writing this song was the phrases that were supposedly said during this one. All right, you sons of bitches.
You want to live forever? Yeah.
That one.
Yeah.
And we even put it into the song.
That's perfect for the song.
So when Joachim was recording, he was like, and where do I sing this? Like, there are no melody for this.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, no, that's just a feeling that you do when in this part. And he's like, then I know.
Wait, can we hear that little bit?
There we go. Shockingly as it is, I mean, when I'm writing something, I try to zoom in on the maps and see what it is.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, this forest is so small.
Yeah.
How could such a significant, brutal fighting happen around this little area here?
Yeah, sure.
And then I looked at maps from World War I, and I realized that it was the same farms, the same fields.
A lot of places you think were big were not that big. I mean, the whole of Verdun, this monster battle. You can walk it. You can walk it in an afternoon. I mean, it's the size of central Stockholm. That's not that big, for 800,000 people to lose their lives.
And Belleau the same. I mean, you walk across it in a few minutes, not even half a day.
Wait. Where's the rest of it?
You can watch it. You can oversee the whole thing. We also even went, before we met in Verdun, you remember that?
Yeah, sure. We had fun.
Stopped at Belleau Memorial.
All right, okay.
Can't wait to go there.
We were driving, and this was actually not a stop planned. The publicist in France didn't even know that we had wrote the song because everything was secret at this time. And then I was watching where we were, and I'm like, Belleau? Okay. So I was telling the driver, we need to take a little bit of a detour. It's only gonna take us 20 minutes, and it's gonna be important for the rest of our lives.
Yeah.
It means a lot when we actually get to a place where we sing about. So yeah.
And now, whose idea was the idea of having a song about devil dogs for the album? Was that yours or Joachim's? Or?
The song was written by me, and we thought about naming it in the original German title, like Teufel. But Devil Dogs just sounds better.
Do you know it? But there is a snack cake called Devil Dogs in the States. It's chocolate and it's got cream on the inside. I don't know if it came after or before the Marines and stuff, but they're good though. They are good.
I have tried it.
Well, you'll be touring the States later this year, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So bring us back a box of Devil Dogs.
I will
so
bring
we can
it back.
do like our review with the whole band. We can get Tommy and Chris and Hannes here,
and we all eat the Devil Dogs.
All right, so that one was really good, and I think I learned a few things there. Belleau Wood's definitely going on my list, which is ever growing longer, of places that I want to be able to go and make some videos for you guys when I get the chance to go to Europe, as soon as COVID clears up and I can raise the funds to do so. And these reaction videos actually help support my passion for historic site videos by giving me the opportunity to do those things. So this is definitely a place I will go and tour, and we will look at those sites firsthand and we'll talk about it. So as always, thanks for watching. Hit that like button. We'll see you again next time.